The faint glow of neon signs flickered against the darkening sky as Terence parked his dusty pickup truck in front of Elliot's tap room, a modest bar just off Highway 74 in North Carolina. The bar wasn't anything fancy, just a staple for locals, truckers, and road-weary souls looking for a cold drink and a quiet corner. Terence, having just returned from deployment a week ago, wanted nothing more than a moment to relax before heading back to the demands of everyday life. Pushing open the creaky door, Terence stepped inside and was greeted by a wave of chatter and the hum of an old jukebox playing Johnny Cash. He scanned the room, taking in the usual crowd, a couple of regulars playing pool, a group laughing at the bar, and a few loners sipping beer in silence. He didn't come here to make friends, just to decompress. He found a corner table near the back, tucked away but with a clear view of the room. His camouflage uniform blended into the dim ambiance, save for the scuffed sneakers on his feet. Shoes chosen for comfort, not appearance. Terence ordered a glass of water and nursed it quietly, his thoughts drifting to the family he was finally going to see after so many months. His mother's cooking and his niece's excited voice were all he could think about. The door slammed open, breaking his reverie. A group of 6 men strode in, their heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. They were older, their leather jackets emblazoned with patches and insignias that told the world they were veterans. They were loud, laughing, and clapping each other on the back as they made their way to the bar. Terence gave them a passing glance before returning to his drink. But one of the men didn't just glance back. The leader, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard and piercing eyes, froze mid-laugh when he noticed Terence. He muttered something to his group, and they all turned to look. Their laughter quieted, replaced by a simmering tension that slowly filled the room. Terence felt their stares but didn't acknowledge them. He'd experienced that kind of look before, the one that sized you up, judged you without context. He sipped his water, trying to focus on the jukebox instead of the growing unease that seemed to ripple through the air. At the bar, the group huddled closer, their voices low but pointed. The burly leader whispered something, and one of the others laughed, casting a pointed glance in Terence's direction. Terence kept his calm, his posture relaxed, but his senses sharp. He had learned long ago to stay composed under pressure, lessons from years of service. Still, the weight of their stares didn't go unnoticed. The night, which had started as a simple escape, was about to take a turn Terence hadn't anticipated. The hum of the jukebox was drowned out by the heavy thuds of boots as the group of men made their way toward Terence's table. Their leader, the burly man with the salt and pepper beard, was at the front, his eyes locked on Terence like a hawk sizing up its prey. Terence felt the shift in energy even before they reached him. The room, once filled with casual chatter, grew noticeably quieter. The bartender paused mid-pour, and the regulars glanced at the group with wary eyes. Terence set his glass down and leaned back slightly, his calm demeanor masking the alertness that had settled into his muscles. "Hey!" the leader barked, stopping just a few feet from Terence. His voice was rough, gravelly, and laced with an edge of disdain. "Nice uniform you got there. Where'd you get it? A Halloween store?" The men behind him chuckled, their laughter thick with mockery. Terence looked up, his expression steady. He'd heard worse, much worse. "It's mine," he replied evenly. "Earned it." The leader raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Earned it, huh? That's funny because I've seen plenty of real soldiers, and none of them wear sneakers with their fatigues. You're trying to play dress-up for sympathy, or maybe a free drink?" Terence's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained level. I don't need sympathy or free drinks. I'm just here to enjoy my evening." The leader's lips curled into a smirk as he leaned in closer, his beer-soaked breath invading Terrence's space. "You don't look like no soldier to me," he sneered. "Where's your boots? Your tags? Hell, you probably don't even know how to salute properly." One of the men behind him added, "Bet he couldn't tell us the first thing about basic training." Another chimed in, "Probably never seen a battlefield in his life." The group erupted in laughter again, their voices grating against the low hum of the jukebox. Terrence stayed silent, his eyes moving between the men. He wasn't intimidated, but he wasn't about to fan the flames either. His years in the service had taught him how to pick his battles, but there was something about this encounter that rubbed him raw. It wasn't just their words. It was the audacity, the ignorance. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Terrence said finally, his voice calm but firm. The leader, now visibly irritated by Terrence's composure, stepped even closer, his large frame looming over the table. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh?" he sneered. "Walking in here like you belong." "I don't think you do," Terrence replied, meeting the man's gaze, unflinching. "I've served 3 tours overseas," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge. "And I don't need your approval to belong anywhere." The laughter stopped for a moment. The leader hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of Terrence's words. But pride wouldn't let him back down. Instead, he scoffed. "Yeah, prove it. Show us your tags. Otherwise, you're nothing but a liar." Terrence's eyes flicked to the others in the group, noting their uneasy glances. They weren't as sure about their leader's accusations now, but none of them dared to speak up. He exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to escalate. "I don't owe you proof," he said. "But if you think starting something here is a good idea, I'd suggest you think again." The tension in the room was palpable. The bartender's hand hovered near the phone, ready to call for help. The other patrons shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between Terrence and the group. And yet the leader didn't move. Instead, his smirk returned, sharper and meaner than before. "You've got a smart mouth," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Let's see if it's as quick as your fists." The moment hung in the air, stretched tight like a wire ready to snap. The leader's smirk curled deeper as he lunged forward, his hand reaching for Terrence's collar. His movement was clumsy, driven more by bravado than skill, but it was enough to set everything in motion. Terrence didn't think he reacted. Years of training kicked in, and with a swift, precise movement, he sidestepped the grab, catching the man's wrist in midair. In one fluid motion, Terrence twisted the arm behind the man's back and used his weight to push him forward, pinning him face first against the edge of the table. The leader let out a strangled yelp of pain, his bravado evaporating in an instant. The bar erupted in gasps and murmurs as the remaining bikers froze, their wide-eyed stares fixed on their immobilized leader. For a moment, no one moved. Terrence's voice cut through the stunned silence, low and controlled, but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I told you to think twice before starting something," he said. He leaned in slightly, his grip firm but not excessive. "You don't know who you're messing with." The leader struggled against Terrence's hold, but it was no use. The soldier's calm efficiency left no room for error or escape. From across the room, one of the bikers took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised in a half-hearted attempt to intervene. "Hey, man," he stammered. "Let him go. He didn't mean nothing by it." Terrence glanced up, his eyes locking onto the man. "He came at me." "You saw it," he said, his voice steady, unshaken by the chaos around him. "If you want him free, tell him to calm down first." The bartender, who had been silently watching with the phone in hand, finally spoke up. "Maybe it's time for you all to leave before this gets worse." But the leader, Hank, as one of his buddies called him, wasn't ready to back down completely. Even with his arm twisted and his face pressed to the table, he snarled through gritted teeth. "Call the cops," he said. "This guy just assaulted me. He's wearing a fake uniform, and I want him arrested." Terrence released him with a controlled shove, and Hank stumbled forward, clutching his arm as he turned to glare at the soldier. "You'll pay for this," he growled, his tone dripping with malice. The rest of the bikers rallied behind him, emboldened by the perceived slight against their leader. One of them pulled out a phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. "Yeah, we've got a guy here impersonating a soldier," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the bar to hear. "And he just assaulted my friend." Terrence stood still, his expression calm, but his mind racing. He knew how this looked, knew how quickly things could spiral out of control. But he also knew he hadn't done anything wrong. His years of service, his sacrifices, everything he stood for. It would all hold up against their baseless accusations. He just had to stay calm. The bar was alive with murmurs now. Patrons whispering among themselves and casting sidelong glances at Terrence. Some of them looked uneasy, while others seemed quietly impressed by how effortlessly he'd handled the situation. But no one stepped forward to challenge what had happened. Outside, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the tense air. Red and blue lights flashed against the bar's windows, casting shifting shadows across the room. The police had arrived. The doors swung open, and 2 officers stepped into the bar. One was a broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped haircut, his expression unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. The other was a woman with sharp features and a calm, observant demeanor. Their presence immediately silenced the room as all eyes turned toward them. "We got a call about an altercation," the male officer said, his voice steady but firm. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" Hank, clutching his wrist and still red-faced from the encounter, was the first to speak. "That guy assaulted me, and he's impersonating a soldier," he said, pointing a shaky finger at Terrence. "Look at him. He doesn't even have proper boots on." The officer's gaze shifted to Terrence, who stood quietly by his table, his posture relaxed but alert. "Is that true?" the officer asked, his tone neutral. Terrence shook his head slowly and met the officer's eyes. "No, sir. This man and his friends confronted me because they didn't believe I'm a real soldier. When he tried to grab me, I defended myself." The female officer stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. "Did anyone witness what happened?" she asked, her voice carrying a calm authority. The bartender spoke up, breaking the tense silence. "I saw it. Hank went after him first. That soldier just reacted to protect himself. It wasn't an assault." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. One patron near the jukebox added, "Yeah, he didn't start anything. Hank's been on edge since he walked in." The male officer turned back to Terrence. "Do you have any proof of your service, sir?" he asked. Terrence nodded, keeping his movements measured as he gestured toward the duffel bag on the floor by his table. "In that bag, I've got my service uniform with my name and rank. I also have my ID and my wallet. You're welcome to take a look." The officer retrieved the bag and carefully opened it, pulling out the neatly folded uniform adorned with badges and insignias. He inspected it briefly before turning to his partner, who nodded in quiet confirmation. "You're clear," the male officer said, his voice firm but respectful. "We appreciate your cooperation." Hank, still nursing his bruised pride, growled, "You're just going to take his word for it?" He could have faked all that. The female officer shot Hank a sharp look. "Enough. From what I've heard, you instigated this, and you're lucky he's not pressing charges against you for assault." The words hit Hank like a slap, and his bluster began to deflate. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. "Here's how this is going to go," the male officer continued. "We're filing a report about this incident. If you want to pursue your claims, you're welcome to do so. But you should know that false accusations are a serious matter." Hank opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again, realizing he was cornered. The officers stepped back, scanning the room one last time as the tension began to ease. The female officer turned to Terrence. "Thank you for keeping your cool. We'll make sure this is documented correctly." Terrence gave her a small nod, his composure unshaken. "Thank you, officer." The bikers began to shuffle out of the bar, their earlier bravado replaced by awkward silence. Hank, still fuming, glared at Terrence one last time before disappearing through the door. The officers followed shortly after, leaving the bar to slowly return to its usual hum of conversation. Terrence sat back down, his drink untouched. The weight of the encounter lingered, but he was relieved it hadn't escalated further. Around him, the other patrons whispered and stole glances in his direction, their earlier wariness now replaced by quiet respect. A few days later, Terrence was working on his old pickup truck in the driveway of his small home on the outskirts of Fayetteville, North Carolina. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as he tightened a bolt under the hood. The memory of the bar incident lingered, not because of the confrontation itself — he had faced worse in combat — but because of what it represented. It wasn't the first time someone had judged him unfairly, and he doubted it would be the last. The sound of tires crunching gravel pulled him from his thoughts. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned to see a motorcycle rolling into the driveway. The rider was one of the men from the bar, a wiry guy with thinning hair and a leather jacket that looked 2 sizes too big. Terrence recognized him as Bill. Bill cut the engine and dismounted, removing his helmet and hesitating for a moment before stepping closer. His posture was cautious, almost apologetic, as if he were approaching a stray dog he didn't want to startle. "You're right?" Bill asked quietly. Terrence nodded but didn't speak, waiting to see where this was going. Bill cleared his throat and stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets. I wanted to come by and say I'm sorry for what happened at the bar." Terrence raised an eyebrow, surprised, but not entirely convinced. "You were part of it," he said evenly. Bill nodded, his face flushing with guilt. "I know. I didn't stop it, and I should have. Hank, he's got a way of riling people up, and I went along with it. But that doesn't make it right. I've been thinking about it ever since, and I just wanted to tell you that." Terrence studied Bill for a moment. The man's discomfort was evident, but so was his sincerity. "Why now?" Terrence asked, his tone steady. Bill shrugged, looking down at his boots. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because, well, seeing you handle yourself the way you did, it made me realize how wrong we were. You didn't deserve any of that." For a long moment, Terrence said nothing. Then he sighed and leaned against the truck, crossing his arms. "What do you want from me, Bill?" "Forgiveness." Bill looked up, his eyes earnest. "Maybe. But more than that, I want to be better. I've seen a lot of hate in my life, and I don't want to add to it anymore. What we did was wrong, and I need to own up to it." Terrence's expression softened slightly. He had heard apologies before, some genuine, some hollow. This one felt different, not because of the words, but because of the effort it took for Bill to show up at all. "I appreciate you coming here," Terrence said finally. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it's a start." Bill nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thanks, man. I mean it." As Bill mounted his bike and started the engine, Terrence watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The incident at the bar had been an ugly reminder of the prejudice he still faced, but Bill's apology was a glimmer of hope, a small but meaningful step toward understanding. Terrence turned back to his truck, wiping his hands again as he reflected on what had unfolded over the past few days. He knew the fight against ignorance wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone in it. The choices he made, the way he carried himself, could shift perspectives one person at a time. The evening air was calm as he finished his work, the quiet punctuated by the distant hum of cicadas. Terrence felt a sense of resolve, not just to keep moving forward, but to face the world with the same strength and integrity that had carried him through his service. Sometimes the battles weren't fought overseas. Sometimes they were fought right here, in bars, in homes, in hearts. And as far as Terrence was concerned, those battles mattered just as much.